Welcome back, everyone. This will be the final part of the Bands of Mourning read-along. In the sense, this will not be the final part as well, because I will still be doing Secret History after this. But let's get right to it. This is part 3 in its entirety, plus the epilogue. And then at the end of part 2, we found our band going back to Delsing, leaving New Saran or New Seren. So part 3 starts with the band actually going to Delsing and Wax giving Wayne the metal mind that he took off of Calicina. I think it was the gold metal mind, and immediately it becomes clear that Wayne can use that metal mind and that it's filled up to the brim. So this kind of confirms a bit, or at least some of their theories about identity and magic and stuff like that, that it is possible to create metal minds that are unbound to the identity of a person, so anyone can use it, and anyone can fill it as well. But yeah, after they go there, they arrive at the scene, they see this big building which is surrounded by guards, and they leave Steris with the carriage and the guns, and not the guns, the carriage and the horses, and you know, everything, their luggage, I think is the correct word. And they decide to get into the building with this big plan of Wayne, which is called the Spoiled Tomato. They go over a few different plan suggestions, but the Spoiled Tomato actually comes down to Wax giving something that's made of metal to Wayne, and putting a coin on the ground, and then just pushing at this, and making himself heavier, of course, and then just pushing on both sides, actively shoving Wayne up high in the sky. And you know, Wayne cannot push on steel, so he just splatters on the ground, which is like a spoiled tomato. So yeah, the plan, I was very intrigued, or I'm still very intrigued as to what the other plans will be, because there were some descriptive names in it. Something that might be explored in the Lost Metal, something that might not, but we'll see in about 9 months. But anyway, so they enter the building. Well, Wayne enters the building or the site and then gets the rest in. They decide to split. This time, the boys and the girls will go their separate ways. They see this big ship, and they are wondering what's a ship doing out here so far from the sea. But you know, they just put their worries aside, and the girls, the Kandra and Marasi, go find the spike and the cube, also that little aluminum cube, at least I think it's aluminum cube. They recover it from the safe and actually rescue this masked person who is shivering the entire time. It's revealed, of course, that he's from the south. He's one of the southern people. And when they free him, he immediately goes to the safe and he takes out this colored medallion, metal medallion, and just puts it around his arm with this little cloth band, and he immediately gets relieved, which is a sign, of course, that he also has this metal mind that is unconnected to identity and that everyone can use. And the fact that he immediately knew what it was and how to do it is implying that they have mastered that technology, so they know how to do it, and they actually do it in mass production. I mean, mass production is a big word, but it's common practice to do stuff like that. On the other hand, we have Wax and Wayne, our old dynamic duo, who go in the ship to find their sister. In the fight, of course, there's also always a fight scene. Or during their escape, at least after the fight scene, Marasi actually gets shot, unto which the masked man keeps pointing, and I think the only word he knows is please, so he keeps pointing and saying please, 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 and then eventually the band finally decides to follow him, and he leads them to this small compartment between 2 floors of the ship, and it turns out to be this flying ship that is an escape pod powered by Alamancy. So they have to, or at least Wax has to push on this metal cube, and then he the other guy, the masked man, puts this cube in some kind of a command console and it just keeps on flying. And Wax doesn't even have to push anymore. They do, however, have to put on this metal band. So again, this is a metal mind, and everyone has to put on a metal mind except for Wax to make themselves lighter. They pick up stairs along the way, and some of their luggage, of course. And the masked man, he puts on this different medallion, so immediately they feel the lurch of the ship going down, because, you know, he isn't lighter than usual anymore. And he has stored connection, I think. Yeah, it's connection, because now he's able to speak their language. Another example of how quickly and how well they have mastered that technology of, you know, removing identity from a metal mind and having everybody being able to fill and tap that metal mind, which is something that is unheard of even in Elendel. Of course, with that escape pod, they make their way. First, they were planning to go home, but then they convince the southern man. I can't remember his name for the life of me. Yeah, that's not important. So they convince him not to go back home, to his home, to the south, to actually go to the second site, which turns out to be this temple, which of course will probably hold the Bands of Mourning. Along the way, we get some exposition with Marasi and the Masked Man over his people, about his people, because apparently it's not this one big people, it's multiple tribes and multiple classes and stuff like that. They have different masks, they have different rituals. So it's kind of this tribal situation in the south, but being not really a country, but it's one people with different tribes. I think that's the best way to describe it. But on to part 2 of part 3, which is the actual climax of the book. So they fly over to the temple, and in the meantime, they also see, right below them in the snow, they see Soot, so Edwin, Wax's uncle, with some of his crewmates, but also with some of the old crewmates of our southern man. They see the masks and stuff like that, so they might be forced, or they are probably forced to go along with them, acting as guides. And in some confusion or altercation, I think, what's her name again? Telson, Wax's sister, tries to shoot, or at least says that I want to kill him, and tries to shoot, but she is held back by Wayne, I think, or Wax. Yeah, she's held back by Wax. But she stumbles over Wayne while getting back in the ship, kicking something down by accident and alerting, of course, those guys, the crew of Soot, Edward. When the gang arrives at that temple, they hide their ship first, of course, and they arrive at the temple and they see this big statue in front of the temple with one eye and one spiked eye, brandishing a spear. Of course, this is the Sovereign. Yeah, I haven't mentioned that yet. That was in the exposition, I'm sorry. At the end of the first part of part 3, they tell this about the Sovereign, and it's this man that came to their land right after the Harmony rebuilt the world. So everybody thinks it's the Lord Ruler, considering, of course, with the Bands of Mourning are the Lord, or were the Lord Ruler's bands. That legend has melted, so yeah, they see this big statue and immediately they assume, okay, it's the Lord Ruler. But yeah, so we see the Lord Ruler standing there, brandishing the spear and the spiked eye. And Wayne sees that huge spear and thinks, oh yeah, that head, ooh, that's made of aluminum. Aluminum's worth a lot, I have to steal that, so he pockets it and they just go in. In the first part of the temple, they see a lot of the southern people, which are dead, or who are dead, and they immediately assume that they were on some kind of expedition but wanted to retreat or stuff like that and got killed by their crewmates. Yeah, it's something like, it doesn't really matter, but it's this little it's the little things that make the world really feel alive. But then Wax and Milan go in while the rest hangs back. They take Milan with them because, well, being Conrad and being immortal, she can activate the traps and probably get hit by them as well without suffering major damage. I mean, at the end of the traps, she has suffered a lot of damage. I think she even lost an arm. She's lost an arm and some of her flesh and stuff like that. Yeah, she's been battered pretty bad actually by the end of the traps. When they reach the end of the hallway or the ruins or the temple, Wax and Milan see this big door, but they have no idea how to open it, so they get back. When they come back, they see the others, so Steris, Wayne, and Barassi, and of course the Southern Masked Man, standing there with Edward, who is weaving a flag of parley. After a bit of negotiation, of course, Edward says that, hey, I can open that door, which of course forces Wax to take his uncle along with him, and leave, Telsin, Wayne, all of that, leave the guys behind. Opening that door, they see this glass box. Well, not anymore. They see what used to be this glass box, and they all think, okay, yeah, the Bands of Mourning have been stolen. Due to different things, Wax notices that the glass box is actually a decoy. In the meantime, Suits, or Edward, gets angry, making Wax realize there's a mole, because, I think his train of thought was something like, yeah, everything is going great, everything's that, but Edward would not have come in here waving that parley flag if he was not 100% sure, or that he had the upper hand, which makes Wax realize there's a mole, and immediately he tries to shoot his sister, but surprise, she's also an allomancer and a ferrochemist. So Wax, of course, being surprised, he loses that battle, and he gets thrown, or he falls into some kind of pit. That pit was deeper than expected, so he breaks a leg or stuff like that. He can't walk, I think, and gets shot multiple times as well. But of course, there are still others with them, and they discover that through that magic that Edward and Telsin used, which was both ferrochemical and allomantic, that they actually have hemologic spikes in them. And they reveal that they have each have 3 hemologic spikes in them. They have 3 boons, because the 4th one would make them susceptible to ruin, I think. Susceptible to Harmony's train of thought, or to be influenced by Harmony, as was the Condra Bleeder in the previous book. During the fights with Telsin and Edward on one side, and our friends on the other side, minus Wax, Milan also gets injected with that same something like that, with the same fluid, let's put it that way, that Leslie was injected in, or Bleeder was injected with in the last book, and she immediately starts to lose form and just drops to the ground, and she turns fluid, I think. I guess is the best word for it. She turns liquid or fluid, and she gets her spike stolen by Telsin. After winning that fight, Telsin is holding a gun, I think, at Steris and Barassi, and Wayne, of course, keeping them occupied, and Edward decides to follow Wax into the pit. He activates this trap that crushes Wax, because they have noticed that Wax had gone in, because he saw that it was a big room, so Wax got a bit deeper in. He saw these monks sitting around something, these bracers, and Wax, when Edward dropped down, he also saw the same thing. So he thinks, yeah, shit, I can't have Wax touching those bands, because then everything will go to shit. So he activates this trap, crushing Wax with a lot of rocks, and then puts on the bracers and finds them empty. They've been tapped, so there's nothing. They've been totally drained, completely drained. And then Wayne, who had been able to escape this part, actually comes in, kicks away Edward, and Edward flees. In the meantime, we see from Wax's viewpoint that he's stuck beneath those big rocks, and he's actually figured out what the Bands of Mourning are. He says, okay, it's not the decoy that was in the glass box. These Bands of Mourning in front of me were also a decoy, so there's only one option left. But before he can tell Wayne, he dies. So yeah, big surprise. I actually did not see that coming. Wax dying, because, we all know there's a 4th book coming. So this was something that caught me off guard. actually, which is something that I always welcome. But then after Wax dies, we see everything happen in a space of probably a few minutes from different points of view. We see the afterlife, which is Wax talking to Harmony, having this small conversation, this philosophical / religious conversation. Of course, Wax still hating on Harmony. So that's part one. Then we have Marasi's point of view, who has actually figured out the same thing Wax has, approximately at the same time, but she grabs the spearhead and she taps everything at once, all the ferrochemical powers, all the elementic powers, and she becomes an actual demigod, resurrecting Wax. And at the same time, we see Steris from the other side, being surprised at what Marasi is doing, but also making herself useful because our friend, the Masked Man, was again shivering to death. I think he had even stopped shivering because he was so cold that he did not feel it. But Steris actually had stored one of her warmth medallions that she got from the Masked Man inside of a hollowed out book. So she gave it to him, and of course she makes herself useful because, well, one of their friends survives. And then we see Wax&Wayne's point of view, in which he, right after Wax dies, he grabs the shotgun, overcoming all of his fears, and setting out to kill Telsin. Telsin, of course, escaped, because after she saw Marasi becoming a demigod, she ran. So we see Steris, and suddenly everything's changing. Marasi decides that after Wax has been resurrected, the bands are not for her. So she goes to Wax, after, of course, demolishing the entire crew of Telsin and Edward, and she gives him the bands of mourning. Wax immediately goes to the ship, because they, in the meantime, had figured out how to fly the ship with the old crewmates of our Masked Man. He has a battle with Edward. In the meantime, he sees Steris and our Masked Man going to his old crewmates on the ground and giving them medallions, giving them shotguns or other guns, asking them to fight. We also see Wayne actively chasing Telsin, shooting her, and taking her spikes and probably taking Milan's spikes and probably her spikes as well, and restoring Milan. At the same time, when that's happening, we see Wax having that battle with Edward. He brings down the entire he first takes down Edward, and then he brings out the entire ship, where everybody, of course, surrenders. The entire crew surrenders because they've seen the power of this Bands of Mourning wielding demigod Wax, and they all scare shitless. But then they have some big debates amongst themselves and the southern people about the Bands of Mourning, which everybody considers their legacy or their property, I think. So Wax and Steris decide that they will give it to Milan, because Milan is, an immortal and a descendant of the gods, or a creature that is devoted to harmony. So yeah, they all agree on that the immortal one is probably the best to safeguard, or the best choice to safeguard the Bands of Mourning, which have been drained completely anyway. And they give the ship back to their old crew. So the actual Masked Men, the southern people, get their ship back on the condition that they open trade with Elendel and that they bring back the gang to Elendel. However, after all that, they try to find Telsin and they see that she has escaped. There's no body anymore. No spikes, no body, nothing. So she has escaped, which probably will mean that she will be the Book 4 villain, or a part of the Book 4 villain organization, which was, of course, to be expected, actually. But yeah, so they land in Elendel at the epilogue, having this big conversation with Governor Aradel, who says that they're under heavy criticism you know, because of the debacle in New Saran, which means that Wax might have started the Civil War, or inadvertently started the Civil War, you know, because of him being framed for killing Calasina and all that. The good news is, of course, that they have open trade with the South. So they kind of get on the governor's good side, I think. He's still not very pleased, but at least, yeah, you know, it balances out. Not really, but, you know, it balances it out a little. Of course, the very, very ending is something that I loved, and that's Wax and Steris go to this separate room, and there's a priest, and Wax asks Steris to marry him, not out of necessity, not because it's an arranged marriage, just because he wants to, and because he loves her, and because they both want to. So of course she accepts. No, that was actually the end of part 3. Now that I think of it, we have this epilogue after the marriage of Wax and Steris, which is Edward, who had been arrested, that gets visited in a cell by this being with red eyes. It's implied that it's this kind of Kandra-ish creature that's been made by a different god than Harmony. And that creature blows himself up, blows Edward up, killing everybody in the process. And the explosion wakes Wax. He picks up the coin that he received from the beggar, who is Hoyd, in part 2, and actually sees that it's 2 different kinds of metal intermingled with each other. So it's this medallion, like our masked friend used, and he notices that it's copper, and copper stores memories, so he immediately placed it around his arm or his wrist, I can't really remember, and he gets thrown into this world of memory and starts tapping it, and he gets thrown into this world of memories, and he sees the world through one eye and one spike, you know, being the sovereign, of course, of the southern people of the South, yes, same thing, who arrives in the village of the Max people, which is, I think, about 300 years ago, give or take the Catasender. But he sees that, you know, where the South used to be something that was very hot, and the people who lived there were adapted to the heat, now it was this frozen wasteland, and they, of course, all kept dying of the cold, because they were not used to that climate. Well, it's a relatively normal climate. I think it's best comparable with Scandinavia, I think, in which summer is normal, but the colder months are actually very cold. I think it's something like that. But yeah, anyway, they were not used to the cold, so they were all dying. And that man sees this older woman and tries to help her, and he reaches out. And when he reaches out, of course, you see from his own point of view, you see his arm, which is full of scars. And the word he whispers to that elderly woman that he's reaching out to is, you have 2 guesses, survive. So big reveal. That's Kelsier. Of course, it was a dead giveaway with the spear, in hindsight, because who would make this statue of himself wielding a spear, wielding the weapon that he has been killed by, because the Lord Ruler was also killed by a spear. So you would think that he would hate spears, I think. Also, the Lord Ruler did not have a spiked eye, in my recollection. So this means that Kelsier, of course, has found a way to get his body back, or at least manifest himself in some way in the physical realm. Because we know, if you've read the Cosmere, there's the cognitive realm, the spiritual realm, and the physical realm. So that was the Bands of Mourning, and holy guacamole, guys. This was a wild ride. I love this part, you know, having Kelsier at the end, who spiked himself at least once for God knows what reason. Probably, of course, to get his body back, I think, because, you know, through his spiked eye, he actually sees the metal lines, which is strange because he was already Mistborn. So he has no use, at least except for enhancing his power, but he has no use, or not a lot of use, to actually gain the seal pushing power. That being said, he was in possession of the Bands of Mourning, and he was the one that taught people how to make this blank slate metal mind, you know, a metal mind that anyone can tap, anyone can fill. This has so many implications for the future of allomancy, of ferrochemical abilities, even hemalurgy, that it's something that I really look forward to. But that being said, I love part 3. From beginning to end, actually. You know, we have the mole, we have the red herrings, we have the blooming love between Wax and Steris, we have Wayne overcoming his fears of shotgun, we have Marasi becoming a god and actively turning down becoming a god, we have Wax becoming a god, we have Milan, I couldn't remember her name for a second, we have Milan, who is the actual MVP of everything, because she gets back the spike of her lure, she gets back the cube, she gets all the traps that make sure that Wax gets in unharmed. Well, of course, she fails at that, but because Wax gets harmed in a big way, but because of Telsin and what's his name again, Edward. But yeah, she's one of the MVPs, and I think she was very well used, especially in contrast to part 2, where she had this limited screen time or page time. This was actually a Sanderlanche at its finest. There's not really that much more to say about it. The implications of all these magical contributions and combinations and new uses for the medals are so big and so huge. I think that when we consider the words of Brandon of a few years back, I don't remember when or at what con he said that, but he actually said that Mistborn eras 3 and 4, so in a few years, and in about 15 years, I think 10-15 years, I know, depending on how quickly and what he writes, and in between, of course, that the magic will probably be a science by then, because we'll have this 1980s style technology era 3, and then we'll have this big space opera future era 4 Mistborn. So by then the magic system will probably be a science, as Brandon has said. So they will have most likely discovered a lot of new combinations. You know, the combinations of powers as well, which were mentioned back in the beginning of part 2 by Chris. So this has so many implications for the Lost Metal that it's this great and amazing setup interwoven with an actual great story. So this book is, in my book, this book is one of the best books that Brandon has ever written, in my opinion. Even though I loved Stormlight, even though I love all the other Mistborn books, for me, this, for now, is the best book that Brandon has written. Even more than Rhythm of War, or Oathbringer, or Way of Kings, or The Arcanum Unbound, because the short stories there are great as well. I'll probably hold that for this small review at a later time as well. But that was it for this week. Next week we'll be doing The Secret History, and I chose to read that after Bands of Mourning because, one, it was released at the same date as Bands of Mourning, and two, the actual existence of that book is a spoiler, because, you know, it's about Kelsier and what happens to him at the end of book 1. I had no idea what, of course, but I think that this big reveal that it's actually not the Lord Ruler, but the Lord of Scars, as Hoyt calls him, would probably have been spoiled because, you know, we know he survives now, and the secret history was about what happens to him. So now I know he survives, so now I of course want to know what happens to him. Secret history is not that big. I think it's just this 120 page book, something like that. I can't remember exactly what it is because I have it in the Arcanum Unbound, so it's not that one small book. But that's for next week. For now, my mission's been accomplished. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye bye.